Okay, I think I'm going to make a start now, and hopefully those additional people will join shortly. But we've got a fair bit that we want to get through today. So let's go. So it's really great to be with you all today, and thank you so much for joining. This is a collaborative event with Barbary and Cheeky Little Careers. And my name is Matt Verrill, and I'm an associate executive coach with cheekyllittlecareers.com. But I also run my own executive coaching practice. Let me tell you a little bit about me and a little bit about Cheeky Little Careers. So I trained and qualified with Allen & Overy. I went through the conventional GDL and LPC route and qualified in 2013 into A&O's leverage finance team. After about a year and a half, I moved to a smaller firm called Flaggate, where I did a lot of real estate finance and general banking work. And then at the start of 2017, I realized that I wasn't finding a career in law so fulfilling and that I wanted to make a change. So I came out of law and did a bit of kind of exploring and figuring out what it is I wanted to do. But in the end, I realized that I really wanted to spend time working with people who needed a lot of support, which is why I then became a full-time carer working in dementia, end of life, and palliative care. And working with people at the end of their lives completely shifted my own perspective on my own life and what life is all about. And it taught me that we really need to make the most of every day that we have, and we owe it to ourselves to be happy in what we're doing, whether that's work or personal, whatever. So I decided to explore coaching. I wanted to help work with people to maximize their opportunities and to maximize their careers and to maximize their personal lives. So I retrained and qualified as an executive coach and set up my practice in 2019. Cheeky Little Careers itself is quite a young website, but it is a fantastic website, and I got attracted to it through getting to know Hasnara, who's one of the co-founders, and she co-founded it along with her brother. And this is a careers and lifestyle website, which is such a huge, vast wealth of information that's contained on there. It's got some unbiased careers advice, inspirational stories, blogs from role models and guest speakers, lots and lots of topical discussions, along with various courses and events that they run as well. So I'd really encourage you to take a look at the website if you haven't done so already, because it will really help you, whatever stage you're at now, whether you're looking at starting the SQE prep course or you may be a bit further along, and even when you've actually qualified as well, if you're going down the legal route or any route, there's a wealth of information, so please do check it out. So let's think about what we're going to cover today. So as you know, this is about resilience and stress management, targeted primarily at future lawyers. But we're going to break it down and start quite simple. Start with the basics. And actually, how do we define resilience? What does it actually mean? Because if you think about it, it's a term that you hear branded around an awful lot. You'll see it splashed around the media or in day-to-day conversations. But if someone actually said to you, how do you define it? What would your answer be? Would you be able to come up with a clear-cut definition? So we're going to have a look at that. And then we're going to explore where it actually comes from. Is it something that we're born with, or is it something that we can develop over time? So we'll look at that, and we'll also look at the impact that our childhood has on developing our resilience levels. Then we're going to consider how we boost resilience, because this is where sort of the magic happens. If you feel like you are sometimes struggling a bit, if you feel like day to day it's quite hard to balance everything that's going on, it's like you're spinning multiple plates and you're having to constantly run between them to keep them going. Don't worry, you're not alone, because a lot of people feel this, particularly at the moment, where we try and give this outwardly projection that everything's going well and everything's fine and we're coping well, but underneath the surface, we're actually finding things a bit tough. And know that it's okay to find things a bit tough. We can all do with topping up our resilience levels from time to time. So we're going to consider how we can do that. And then tied quite closely to that is around stress. We'll look at what stress is, and we'll look at how it can be managed. And then we'll consider, actually, is stress always a negative thing? Or are there times when stress is actually quite positive. So we'll look at that too. And then we'll kind of wrap it all up around how this will apply to you as a future lawyer. So we will, I'm going to share with you quite an interesting diagram which the Law Society produced about attributes of a future lawyer. And we'll see where resilience fits into that and consider some of the other elements that the Law Society think we should be focusing on. Now, I want to build in a bit of time at the end for questions. So if I could please ask you to, you're welcome to start putting questions into the chat, but I won't look at those questions until I've got through the slides. But please don't worry, I'm very keen to answer as many questions as possible. I know some have already come through. So that's important to me that you get those questions answered. And if we do run out of time, I'm happy to answer them either by email, or I can be sent a list of questions and I can follow up after today and get them back to you. So let's have a look at how we define resilience. So I really want to encourage you to think about how you would define it to start with. We'll notice that based on our own experiences, we'll all have different definitions of what resilience means. So there is this situational context to resilience. And we're also interested in thinking, well, why does one person differ from another, and what makes each of us the person that we are? Now, there's no right or wrong answer with this. It's not a test or anything like that. And it is because of our own experiences that we will always think of a slightly different definition. But one thing to get you started is to think about a current challenge that you're facing. It might be work-related, course-related, studies, or something in your personal life. And then think about somebody who, in your mind, shows very resilient qualities. How would they deal with that challenge that you're facing? What would they say? What would they recommend you did? What advice would they give you? This helps us get a bit unstuck if we're not quite sure how to move forward with something. Think about what they might be saying, how they're talking. Are they coming across very clear and confident? Have a look at their body language. Are they standing or sitting upright? Are they maintaining eye contact? Do they come across as very confident? A little health warning is always be aware that just because somebody comes across as being confident or resilient doesn't necessarily mean they are. We all have this sort of poker face sometimes that we can quite easily show when we want to, particularly in a work context. So bear that in mind, that people may not be quite as resilient as you think. Anyway, I want to share with you one definition, and there are many, many different definitions out there, but this is just one. And it's the ability to bounce forward from adversity and grow from challenges. Now, there are many definitions which talk about bouncing back, the ability to bounce back. That's what being resilient is. But I don't actually like the term bouncing back. And the reason I don't like it is because whatever adversity or challenge has tested our resilience is going to change us, basically. We're never going to be the same person as a result of that, because we grow. We grow through our experiences. And that's how our resilience grows as well. So we're never going back to the same person we were before. We're actually going forward. We're beyond that person now. And that's something that should be celebrated. So in some respects, having the opportunity to have our resilience tested is actually a good thing. Even if at the time it's quite uncomfortable. It doesn't feel very nice. And there's no getting away from that. You're going to feel a bit uncomfortable from time to time. But hopefully by the end of today, you're going to have some tips as to how you can actually move forward in a positive way without getting stuck, or without feeling like you're going backwards or just not moving forward at all. So it's really closely linked to our thinking, to our behavior, our attitude, and our feelings. And they all come together when it comes to a response that we give in any particular situation or event or circumstance. So we know resilience is really closely related to change. And we know that change can cause turbulence. And that really tests our personal resilience. But the thing with change is that it's a normal part of life. So it's here to stay. The good news is that we have millennia of experience of adapting and evolving through change. But how does that help us now? It's easy to say that, but how does that actually help us get through today and what we are facing today? Because what worked for us last year probably won't work for us this year, and almost certainly won't work for us next year. So we have to be mindful that just because change is a constant thing, does it mean it's changing at a constant rate? And the answer is probably not. And this last sort of 12 months in particular has really shown how adaptable we have to be, just to get through a simple day that we wouldn't have thought anything about more than 12 or sort of 14 months ago. So I mentioned the fact that we have this situational context around how we can define resilience. And if you think if you're a lawyer, will define resilience very differently to somebody who is currently been diagnosed with a terminal illness versus someone else who is currently in a conflict zone. So we have to be mindful that we all will define it slightly differently. But you'll find standard definitions, and I'd encourage you to go out and find one that kind of suits you and fits in with where you think and how you kind of think and how you view the world around you. So let's consider now where it actually comes from. Is it something that we're born with? Well, I think in answer to that, it's really no. We're not born with a certain level of resilience. It's our experiences which inform that resilience and really give us that exposure and opportunity to learn and grow. So it seems to be, a lot of people talk about the first 7 years of a child's life as being the critical stage when we start building up a picture of people and the world around us. At that time of our lives, our minds are so open to what's going on because we're constantly trying to learn and figure out our place in the world. And through that, we form beliefs about people, beliefs about the world around us. You might have heard things like somebody would say, oh, people like us, we never get those sort of opportunities. Now that's a statement and that becomes a belief. The problem is, as a child, if you keep hearing that, that'll stick with you and that'll stick with you right into adulthood. And it's very hard to shift those beliefs sometimes. But we'll look at how we can maybe do that in a bit. So if you think about a child that's grown up in a particularly hard environment, so say it's been a struggle to put food on the table, or maybe the family members seem to work endlessly for little or no return, then that child can decide from quite an early young age that they're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that they're never in that situation, or that they never put their own children in that situation again. So they can develop quite a high level of resilience from quite an early age. Likewise, if you have children who come from maybe broken families and they've had multiple caregivers, maybe they've had to stand in as a carer as well from time to time, they've actually realized again from an early age what they're capable of. And this self-awareness actually helps to grow their resilience too, and that will stay with them throughout life. Now, we talk a lot about role models, and you hear the term role model branded around quite a lot. And it's interesting because a lot of children, they thrive on that kind of support. You want that supportive environment of care and compassion. That goes a long way in developing the frameworks and the building blocks for resilience. But let's not focus solely on childhood, because it implies that if you don't get it in childhood or don't get exposure in childhood, then that's it. Of course, the reality is it's never too late to start building resilience. And we get tested throughout life. You can probably think back to recent years of change and turbulence in your own lives and how you have maybe reacted in certain situations. Maybe you haven't reacted in ways that you wanted to. But know that just because you reacted in a particular way in the past does not mean you have to react the same way in the future, particularly when resilience and stress management come into play as well. So how can we boost our resilience? We've identified that we need a bit of a top up from time to time. So what can we actually do to change that? How can we say, you know what, I realize that this is an issue for me, And this is where you have to be quite honest with yourselves. So what am I going to do? The first thing I want to talk about is optimism. Now, optimism is such a critical factor when it comes to building and boosting resilience. Think about yourself and your own outlook. Are you glass half full or a glass half empty personality? You'll know which side of the fence you fall on. But regardless of which side you fall on, know that optimism is something that can be developed and it can actually be learned as well. So like resilience, we're not born with a certain level of optimism. It's developed from the people around us through observation, through seeing how they react in certain situations. So if we don't like the way that we react in a certain situation, we can change it. And now when we think about an optimistic tendencies, let's think about a particular situation where something bad has happened. So an optimist will see that situation and they'll say, okay, well, it's clearly not my fault, unless it obviously is, of course, but let's assume it isn't your fault. That situation is changeable, therefore you can do something about it. And also that whatever caused that bad event or that circumstance, it's not going to impact all other areas of your life. And if we flip that as to how a pessimist would think, they're more likely to think, okay, yeah, this situation is all my fault. I can't change it. I can't do anything about it. It is what it is. And that now that this has happened, it's going to have a knock-on effect on everything else going forward for me. Now, when you think about those two different mindsets and viewpoints, there are very different feelings attributed to either one of those. The optimist sees potential and opportunity, whereas the pessimist will see limitation and you're very stuck, you can't move forward. So if you see yourself as a bit of a pessimist or you see yourself as a glass half empty person, what can you do to change that? If indeed you want to change it. You don't have to change it. You've got to want to do it. There's no rule book saying you should be an optimist over a pessimist. There's a place in this world for both, and both have key roles to play in certain situations. Lawyers in particular have a bit of a reputation for being on the more pessimistic side, as we're trained to look for what could go wrong. And I personally sometimes found it quite difficult to switch off. So at work, you'd be looking for what could potentially go wrong. But I found in my personal life, I was also looking for the same thing, which wasn't really serving me particularly well. So just be aware if you can compartmentalize. But let's try this this exercise, which we'll go through the framework and then I'll apply it to a real life example. So this is the Abcde framework, and this is used quite successfully to change the way you may view the world around you. You're going to start viewing things more from an optimistic standpoint. So adversity is the first point. So this is where you simply describe the adverse situation that's going on around you. Something has triggered a feeling of helplessness. What is that? You have to identify it and you have to name it. Otherwise, you can't really move forward. So you need to know where this feeling started. What caused this feeling that you're experiencing? We'll assume it's a negative feeling. What caused this negative feeling to start? And then we're going to consider the beliefs that have now arisen. So the adverse situation creates thoughts. And these thoughts in turn will create beliefs as to what's going on around us. And those beliefs are going to stick with us. So we need to be very mindful as to what we are believing in terms of how we're interpreting the world around us, in terms of how we're thinking about ourselves and our own abilities as well. So once we've addressed what beliefs we might be thinking, we then think, what are the consequences of having those beliefs? Because the direct result of our beliefs will be that we create feelings and then we act based out on those feelings. Now that can serve us well, or it can serve us in a negative way. But we really need to think, okay, so if I have this belief, what's the consequence of this belief? What am I doing now or not doing as a result of having this belief? And is that helpful to me? Now this is where we turn things on their head a bit. So we dispute these beliefs. This is where we change that negative belief into a positive one. So you have a phrase, you've got this belief, what's the opposite in the positive? And you've got to dispute it. So you need evidence to show that actually this belief, this is wrong. I don't have to live my life by this. It's just not correct, because actually I don't have any evidence to support it at all. I've thought about it, and I thought this is part of me for the last however long, but do I actually have any evidence? So this is where you dispute it. And then once you've created a more positive belief, you'll notice that you feel a lot more energized about the world around you, about yourself. Notice what happens when you dispel that negative belief, because it'll start feeling a lot better than sticking with the negative belief and believing that that is it. That's all my life is. So let's look at an example. Let's say you've just sent off 10 applications to training contracts. After 3 weeks, you've started getting responses. And so far, you've received 6 rejections. What's your initial response? What's your initial reaction? Think about what you're thinking. Chances are it's going to be something quite negative. You'll start getting lots of these mind chatter things in your head which are saying, well, we'll come on to what you could be saying in a second. So if we apply this Abcde framework, let's start with the adversity. So the adversity would be essentially receiving those rejection emails after rejection email after rejection email. So we're feeling pretty deflated. We're not feeling particularly ecstatic about the results that are coming through. It's not what we hoped. It's not what we planned for. It's not why we spent those hours filling out the application forms. So the more we think about it, we start to have these feelings building up inside us. And we move on to the B, the beliefs. I'm no good at application forms. There aren't any jobs around. I don't think I'm really cut out to be a lawyer after all. These are some of the things that you could be starting to say to yourself as a result of receiving these rejections. And you can see that with these statements that you're making, it doesn't help you to feel any better. It really solidifies this kind of deflated feeling that you've noticed as a result of receiving these rejections. So what are the consequences? Well, your confidence has been knocked. There's probably no doubt about that. And you've also noticed that there are another 2 training contract applications which just opened up for 2 more firms. But because you are in this more negative mindset where you're thinking, I don't know if I'm really cut out for this. I don't think I'm really good at applications. You decide not to apply. So the consequence of these negative beliefs is you stop. You decide not to proceed because you don't think it's going to go anywhere anyway. So what's the point? So let's think about how we dispute this. So we have this negative belief that we're not really good enough, that we won't get a job or there aren't any jobs out there. But let's reframe it. Let's think, actually, you know what? Maybe I am good enough. There must be instances in your past where you have been good enough. You have got jobs. You have got positive feedback. So focus on those and know that actually this might just be a little setback. There might be a reason, quite a simple one, as to why I haven't been successful with these applications so far. Think if you were reading an application as a member of an HR team, what would you be looking for? Well, maybe there's one simple thing that you could change in your application forms if you had the chance to do it again. Now, what's interesting is now that you've refocused a bit, you decided to go back and look at some of these applications, and you notice that there were consistent spelling mistakes in a couple of the answers which trailed across all the applications. That's actually quite an easy fix. You can sort that, and then you decide to apply for these other 2 training contracts after all, because actually maybe that was a simple reason you got the rejections. So you can see how by going through the framework in a sort of step-by-step way, it starts to change your outlook, and you're going to start to change the way that you sort of react and respond in situations. Now, I'm not going to lie, this doesn't really sort of come overnight. You have to put in the time and have a bit of patience, because when you're trying to change a mindset, it does take time, and it takes looking at sort of daily as well. So you have to give yourself that time. But you have to ask yourself, do I owe it to myself to give it a shot? If a particular way of thinking isn't serving you, surely you owe it to yourself to try and change that. But again, it's all, you don't have to. You don't have to. It's entirely up to you. It's your life. It's your call, and you get to call the shots in that respect. But anyway, I found this really helpful. This is very helpful when I use it with clients when they're going through particular challenges and come across a bit of a roadblock, can't think of a way forward. So we go through this in a sort of step-by-step way, and I find that it does work quite well. So let's think about some additional tips for boosting our resilience. The first one is hitting the brakes. And this might sound a bit strange, but in order to be able to bounce forward, we have to build in recovery time. You can't just keep going and going and going and going and going like that Duracell bunny in that advert. It'd be great if we could, but unfortunately we are only human. So we have to build in sufficient recovery time. And that's tricky because we're in a world where there are distractions all around us. Personal life, work, studies, there's always something to be done, or so we think. We feel like we need to always be connected to social media as well, right up until the time when you might go to sleep. Or maybe you can't get work off your mind, or you can't get studies off your mind because you have particular deadlines that you're working to. So it can seem like there's always something occupying our attention. If we're not getting enough rest and enough relaxation, then our natural resources will start to get depleted. And that's a one-way street. We'll see when we look at a stress graph a bit later, what happens when we keep going and going and going. So what can we do? Well, it's quite simple really, and none of this will be new to you. Things like building break times throughout your day, building time to listen to your favorite music or chat to friends or family and not think about work or studies. Read a novel. Whatever works best for you, and you'll have an idea as to what you like to do in order to relax or switch off. And that's what you really need to build in, particularly when you are looking at further down the road and qualifying as a lawyer or even as a trainee solicitor as well. The days can be quite intense, and we're still yet to see what the kind of long-term working relationships will be, or in terms of will we be in a virtual space or will we be in a more hybrid blend between office and virtual. Switching off is a lot harder when you are working and living in the same space. Many people, their office is also next to their bed, so they sleep right next to their office, and switching off is really, really hard. And this is where you need to have that sort of discipline to think, you know what, I'll take myself away from this space and give myself time. That's all it is, time, just to recover a bit. Now, self-esteem is a really, really big factor when it comes to resilience. It's sort of feeling good about ourselves, really. And let me tell you, it's okay to feel good about yourself. A lot of people feel guilty about feeling good about themselves, or feel that they shouldn't. There must be a reason why. I shouldn't feel good about myself. Why not? Why not feel good about yourself or what you're doing? Why not give yourself a pat on the back every now and again and celebrate little successes and little wins along the way? Essentially, you've got to have the courage to change something if it doesn't serve you in a particular way. So your self-esteem will keep going down and down and down if it's chipped away by doing something that you're really, really not enjoying. You're really not getting anything from. And think about your strengths, because we take our strengths for granted. It's very easy to think about what we're not very good at, but how often do you actually sit and think about what you are good at, or make a note of that? That's really powerful, because it just shifts your focus a bit. And anything you can do to help you feel better about yourself will actually boost your resilience too. It'll mean that when something comes along which is challenging, you will have that confidence, say, yeah, I can move forward with this. I can do this. And this links very nicely into the third bullet point on the screen there, which is belief in your ability to achieve what you set out to achieve, also known as self-efficacy. So who's ever thought, I can't do that? I know I certainly have from time to time. Nope, can't do that. Not possible. I don't have the ability. The problem when we say that is that we don't then even try. So our brain immediately switches off. It's like, yeah, okay, I agree with you, Matt, you can't do it. So I'm going to go back to sleep now. So will we ever realize our full potential if we never try something that we're not sure we're good at until we've tried it? So next time you catch yourself thinking like that, hit the brakes, stop, and ask yourself how you might be able to reframe that into a more positive statement. Let's think, for example, you're trying to balance your time between studies, you might be also working. What are you going to do to make sure that you can keep all the plates spinning? You might be thinking that you could never fit everything into your day, but that's when you need to stop, because otherwise you might prove yourself right. So you could say that actually, whilst I have a lot to do, I'm actually going to put together a schedule, and I'm going to stick quite rigorously to this schedule. I'm going to break my day down by the hour, so I know exactly what I'm doing between 9:30 and 7:30, and then stick to it. You might think, well, it could be busy for a while, but in the long run, I'll be thanking myself for the effort that I put in now. It can be simple things like that. Just having that belief that you can achieve what you set out to achieve puts you in really good stead and a really good position for boosting that resilience and moving forward in a really positive way. Now, the last one there is asking for help. And this might seem obvious, but it's surprising how few people actually do ask for help when they need to or are struggling. Most people like to pretend that everything's fine, like we spoke about earlier, having this poker face. And we also think sometimes that if you're asking for help, it can be a sign of weakness, that you haven't quite got things under control, that you can't be trusted with certain things, you shouldn't be given too much responsibility. But all of these are unproven beliefs, often without evidence. And personally, I used to bottle things up a lot. I used to try and keep everything to myself and make out that everything was fine. And if something wasn't fine, then I, and only me, would figure out a way forward, only that didn't always work according to plan. But if instead we think about those people around us, think about your network, who could you realistically ask for help? And there will always be people in your life who will be helpful in a particular area, and think about it. The power of networks should never be underestimated, and particularly as you move forward in your legal careers as well. It's so important thinking about your network and who could help you, and in return, who you could also help and support as well. And resilient people have learned that when they need to ask for help, they will ask for help, and they're not ashamed to do it because they learn, and the next time they have the answer and their experience builds. And also, people like being asked for help. They like helping others. Well, most people anyway. So you'd be surprised that actually when you do go and ask, someone says, actually, yeah, that's fine. Or if they can't, then they'll say, you know what, come back in an hour and we'll have a chat. So that's a really simple but quite effective tip that I've certainly found personally useful. So let's talk about stress. Linked very closely to resilience, but what is it? Quite simply, it's a universal response to either a positive or a negative stimulus. So something's happened. It's either good or bad. That's how our brain sees it. And as soon as we see it, we respond. It's triggered, something happens. Now, we'll all be familiar with this feeling of stress. We all experience it. It won't go away. Stress is always going to be present in our lives. So if that's the case, how do we make sure that it doesn't really overtake our lives. We want to be able to get through our day, get through these obstacles without feeling like it's too much to handle. We don't want to go down that fatigue, that breakdown and burnout route. So we need to knock it on the head before it starts to even get there. Now, there was a gentleman called Dr. Hans Selye, and he was a pioneer in the study of stress. And he actually found that stress can have both positive and negative impacts. But when we think about positive stress, in terms of the reaction in our body, it's pretty much the same as negative stress. If you're feeling really excited, your heart rate starts to go up. You might get sweaty palms. You might be a bit jittery, unable to sit still. But the same thing happens if you're experiencing a negative stress too. Sometimes that fight or flight makes you want to get up and run away from whatever event is causing you that stress. Or you get those sweaty palms, clammy, you get the elevated heart rate as well. So it's interesting that regardless of if it's positive or negative, we kind of react in the same way. Only with the positive, we might have more of a smile on our faces. So let's have a look at this, this graph that's on your screens now. So we can see that when stress is at its lowest point, our performance actually is also pretty low. So this indicates that really we do need a bit of stress to get us going, to get us performing well. And as our stress starts to build, we'll notice that our performance in turn increases. And we reach this optimal performance level, which is where we're really energized, we're focused, everything that we do is effortless. We feel, yeah, we're in control of this. I know what I'm doing. I feel quite comfortable. Yes, there's a lot on, but I'm confident that I know what I'm doing. I'm confident I can get it done in a good way to the deadlines that I have. But then something happens. Then we start noticing those stress levels building up a little bit more. And all of a sudden, we notice we're getting fatigued. At the end of the day, we're feeling absolutely exhausted, like we want to go to bed by 5 o'clock. Now, if we keep along this path where this stress keeps building and building and building, it's going to start impacting our health. And we're going to work towards breakdown or burnout, which is a path we don't want to go down. If we do, then it can be quite hard to claw ourselves back into this optimal performance level again. It's definitely not impossible. It can definitely be done, but it does require quite a lot of effort to be able to do that, and sometimes some quite significant changes in your life as well. So how would a resilient person deal with stress? Well, often they will try and turn disaster into success. They'll have confidence in their ability to do that. So whereas initially we have a gut reaction, we respond very quickly to something. Suddenly it's, oh, that's really terrible, really bad. But then a resilient person thinks, well, actually, is it? Do I have all the information yet? Let me just wait and see, and let me think about how I can actually make this work quite well for me. So they take control as well. They feel confident that they can do that, and they know that they'll put things right, essentially. And they have this curiosity about them. So they're open to trying different things to improve a situation, and they recognize that there is a risk in not taking a risk as well. And this curiosity is when our minds are most open to learning. When you have that, curious about the world around you, curious about situations and experiences and feelings as well. Let's not shy away from feelings and how important they are. So curiosity is a really important ingredient too. And you may find yourselves already, you have quite a high level of curiosity, but if you don't, then simply just ask, I wonder why that has to be that way. Can that be done another way? How might I improve that situation? How might, think of someone that you admire, improve that situation? Or what would they recommend I did? And by asking these open questions, you can really start to learn more about what's going on around you. So how can we manage stress? Well, there are two kind of different thoughts to this. One is distraction and the other is resolution. You'll see from the list there that none of these are overly complicated. But it's surprising how often we don't employ these things. We often shy away from them. We say, actually, you know what, I'll just get through it. I'll cope with the stress by getting through the workload, and that will make things better. But the problem with that is then the workload keeps piling up. So there must be another way. There must be another way. And be under no illusion that once you are going towards qualification, and as trainees, you'll be very busy. So you're going to need to find outlets for managing your stress levels as you go forward. Now, think about yourselves when you feel stressed. How do you naturally respond and react? How do you behave? Are there certain things that you do? Are there things that you say? We all develop our own coping mechanisms over time, and we think that these will serve us best, but sometimes they don't, because they can go a bit unchecked. So we just need to think about, the way that we respond. Is it really serving us in a positive way? Now, Cheeky Little Careers has a number of guided meditations that you can tap into, and you can see meditation is on the list there, and there are many others around as well. But meditation is it's getting more popular. Some people don't like it because they think it sounds a little bit weird, but basically it's just about focusing on yourself and just being in the now, being a bit more present, not thinking about what happened yesterday, and not thinking about what has to be done later this afternoon, but just being in the here and now and having that gratitude for what you already have. So we often think about what we don't have. We often think, oh, if only I won the lottery, I could have this and this and this, and then I could do that and that. But what have you got now? Could it be that actually the position you're in now, compared to many others, is actually quite favorable? If you can have lunch today, isn't that quite a good thing? Is that something we should be grateful for? It might sound a bit silly to say that, but by showing gratitude for what we already have, it means that when we experience stressful situations, they're really not as bad as we might think. And we might actually think ourselves lucky to be in that situation. There could be people who would really love to be in the same position that we are, experiencing the same education, for example, having the same opportunities for studies and for career paths, but who will never get that chance. So having that perspective is quite valuable when it comes to managing stress. Sharing, talking to others, again, is really, really critical. Instead of keeping everything bottled up, they say, what's the saying? A problem shared is a problem halved, isn't it? I think, where if you find there's someone, a friend or family member who you can really rely on and talk to, then use that outlet, use that opportunity, talk it through, because they might have ideas and perspectives on a situation that you didn't think about. And all of a sudden, it's put that stress in perspective, and actually it's not so bad after all. Exercise is more about taking yourself physically away from the stressor, that thing that's causing you the stress. So if it's your computer, don't take it out for a run. Have that distance between it and you. Not to mention the overall benefits of exercise anyway when it comes to a great outlet for stress. But I'm sure you already knew that anyway. Now, the one I want to talk about is also That's Interesting. And I found this to be really helpful when I was trying to manage lots of different transactions and deals as a lawyer. I would get called up and somebody would say, oh, Matt, right, we need you to help out on this now. And this is really urgent. And it's got to be done by whatever the deadline was. Sometimes it was a real deadline, sometimes it wasn't. Now, your initial reaction in that time is your stress levels go through the roof, because you're also thinking about the 10 other things that you've also got to do, which are also apparently super urgent. So I would say to myself, that's interesting. And immediately, by saying that term to myself, it didn't feel so bad, because my brain, instead of focusing on what was wrong or what could go wrong, suddenly started to take interest in what I was doing, in this new transaction, in this new deal, in this new opportunity to find a way to balance everything else. So try it. It may or may not work for you, but I popped it on there anyway because I found it did help me get through some of the sort of tougher balancing acts that you'll likely come across when you're a trainee and further on into qualifying. And then resolution. How can we manage stress through resolution? Well, this is the more direct approach. So we can do lots to help manage the stress or the stressor, that thing that's triggering the stress. But what about facing that head on and doing something to remove it? It may or may not be possible. Now, if you're finding that your job is the major stressor, you may not be able to simply quit and move away from it. But then you question, is it the right career path for you? And you're never stuck. I think that's what I want to stress. There are always options, even if you don't think that there are. And I experienced this when I was coming out of law, because as a lawyer, you work incredibly hard through your training and qualifying. And it's quite easy to assume that, well, if I'm a lawyer, there's nothing else that I can do. But that's not always the case. And you can apply that in your personal lives as well. There are always options. So if something is really causing you a lot of stress, there may be one of the options to think about facing it head on and doing something to remove it. Let's have a look at another technique that I use, which I find is really helpful at putting any challenge into perspective, and also to come up with a plan to move forward, because this is what we want. We don't want to be stuck. We don't want the stress to be so much that we can't move forward. And these 4 questions I've used myself and I've used with clients as well as a way of getting unstuck and being able to maybe see things not as bad as they are. So let's go through them. This is really about getting you to think about your thinking and having that awareness about your thoughts. So think about a challenge. There's a challenge that's going on in your life at the moment, more than likely. It could be anything. It could be personal life. It could be to do with your studies, or if you're working as well. But there's something there, something where you're not feeling happy about it. So the first step is actually to list the worst case scenario, which might seem a bit counterintuitive when we're trying to manage stress, but you'll see how it fits in later on. So what is actually the worst thing that could possibly happen as a result of this challenge? And make a note of it. And as you're doing that, you make a sort of mental note also as to how you're feeling. What kind of feelings is it throwing up? It's likely you're going to be feeling quite uncomfortable. It's likely that you're not really going to be in such a great place. And that's okay. That's all right. You can accept that that's part of this process. That's part of this 4 questions sort of step. You need to go through this. You need to think about what is the worst case scenario. Because once we've done that, we can move on to the second question, which is much more enjoyable, about thinking the best case scenario. What's actually the best result that could come out of this challenge? If everything went well, what's going to happen now? Is it really such a challenge after all? And again, you're just noticing how you're feeling as you're making these notes and writing up about this. You're probably going to be in a much better space now than you were when you were thinking about the first question. Now, this is where we have to take a step back and be a bit more objective. We have to think about what's probably going to happen. What's actually probably going to happen in relation to this challenge? And the clue is it's probably not going to be the worst case scenario, and it may not be the best case scenario either. Somewhere in the middle. What realistically is going to happen? It's maybe it's not so bad after all. So think about what will be, and then notice how you're feeling as you're coming up with that. And now, based on what's probably going to happen, we can come up with an action plan. What one step, just one, we don't need 10 or 20, just one step, can you take now to minimize the effects of that challenge? Or one step to maybe start moving beyond that challenge or addressing that challenge. And it can be something really, really simple, really simple. If we go back to the example around receiving rejections for the training contract applications, we could try and reach out to somebody who has been successful in applications, a friend maybe, and just get them to look through our application and see if they have any tips, or have a chat with them about it. It really hasn't got to be complicated. In fact, the simpler the better, I think. And by thinking and taking this one step, you're already on the path to breaking through the challenge and actually moving forward with it. Things are they're not often as bad as we think they're going to be. We think too much often, and I think particularly lawyers, we do fall into that category. We do think a bit too much about things. Now, there's a place for that, and it can be important, and our clients pay us a lot of money as lawyers to think a lot about things and to make sure that we get stuff right. But let's not let that cloud our judgments into all other aspects of our life too, and the decisions that we make for ourselves day to day. So with this action plan in mind, you can then think of other steps that you could take, and then you can apply these 4 questions to any other situation that you might come across, and then see what happens. Start noticing what happens. So how do we start sort of bringing this together? This diagram here is taken from a document called Horizon Scanning, and this was published by the Law Society in 2018. Now, what I find interesting about these attributes is that it doesn't really mention learn the law, understand the law. This is all soft skills. And you'll see the bottom right, we've got resilience, comes down there as well. So clearly soft skills are pretty important. And I would actually argue that they're more important than anything else, because when you are practicing as a lawyer, your technical knowledge will be taken for granted. People will assume that you have a certain level of technical ability. You're practicing at a particular firm, or you're practicing in a particular area. They will assume that you know your stuff, and that's a given. So you have that responsibility to make sure you do know your stuff, and you are able to kind of carry yourself forward in that area. But what we don't often spend time thinking about are these softer skills around communication, what we've been talking about today, resilience. If you're sitting at your desk at 3 o'clock in the morning, what will you be thinking? How are you going to manage your time? How are you balancing your time at the moment through studying, and if you're working as well? And it's an area which within the legal sector and many other sectors, competitiveness is increasing, and we're expected to get involved in a lot more. It's not simply a day job anymore. There's the pro bono elements, and firms are constantly asking their lawyers to get involved with projects outside the firm, and all this has to be fitted into your day-to-day time. And it's thinking about the softer skills. These are the skills that will really take us through. Resilience and stress management has really never been so topical as we move forward, and particularly with what's going on at the moment. How do we get through our days? How do we get through, let alone to next week? And it's the difference between a successful legal career and one where you'll experience a lot of roadblocks. And fundamentally, it's up to you. You've got the power to do something about it. If there's a change that you've identified that needs to be made, then you can make that change, and you can be that change. We can all change and adapt, as we've learned today through optimism, and it's something that can be learned and developed. But we have to be willing to accept what needs to be changed, and we have to be quite honest and open with ourselves, which is in itself sometimes quite a challenge. We like to kid ourselves a lot, but eventually we have to be honest and say, okay, this is something I need to work on. This is something that hasn't been serving me well. Yes, the technical stuff and learning the law, you've got to do. That's part and parcel of the journey. But if you can start thinking about this now and how this might apply to you going forward, then it puts you in really good stead, actually, amongst your peers for just being able to get through the day-to-day. Because there will be times when your resilience will be tested. There will be times when your stress levels are very high. How do you get through that then? And how do you make sure that you're always bringing your best self to work? And hopefully the techniques that we've looked at today will help when it comes to boosting your resilience and helping you to manage your stress levels. There's quite a lot of literature out there, unsurprisingly. Lots of people have written about this, lots of studies have been done. So I'd encourage you to also do your own research, find something that interests you about resilience and stress management, and do some reading around it. I've mentioned a few exercises today, but the reality is there are hundreds of different things that you could do to try and boost resilience and stress management. But unfortunately, we haven't got a week where we can spend time together going through all that. So I've selected ones which I hope will be most useful to you, that you can really take forward. But I wanted to kind of start wrapping up there because I'm conscious that there are going to be potentially quite a few questions, and it's really important that you have those answered. So I'm going to stop sharing. I notice we're also around 1 o'clock, but I'm happy to stick on a bit if people want to ask some questions. I know we had a couple which was sent through earlier. Maybe I will just start with those. We've got 2 questions that came through earlier. Please, could you provide the best method or strategy that has worked for you in managing so many tasks or projects? So I touched on this a little bit earlier around scheduling and thinking about which is the most urgent thing to do. Sometimes you'll find that, particularly as a trainee, when you're working for different people, people will say, this is urgent. And then the next person will say, oh, this is also really urgent, needs to be done yesterday, which isn't very helpful when we're trying to manage our time. So that's where you need to then ask around some of the other people that you're working with. When does this actually need to be done? And talk to your supervisors, talk to those that you're working with and say, well, this is also what I've got on my plate. Now, what should I prioritize? And don't be afraid to ask, and if need be, ask for some help too. But I find scheduling is really good. If you can plan out your day as to this is what you want to accomplish by the end of the day, and sometimes that will change. You'll get things midday and it will be urgent, have to be done, but that can't always be avoided. Think about what it is you want to do by the end of the day. I actually do it by the hour, so I have an hour by hour schedule, and I get far more done doing that than simply just having a list. It depends what works best for you. You have to find your kind of happy medium in that respect. But I find a schedule gets me through every day, and then it makes sure that I don't then miss stuff, basically. And then the second question is, what are the things an aspiring lawyer should be prepared for, or what are the things that creep up that newly qualified lawyers only realize once qualified? So I think for me, when I reflect back on certainly when I qualified, the biggest thing, well, 2 actually. One is managing expectations. So you'll get a lot of calls in your time, and if you say yes, 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 yes to everything, you're going to be going down that path of burnout. Now, you want to make a good impression, and that's totally understandable, particularly when you're a trainee and you're thinking about qualification. If you want to stay with the same firm or even move firms, you want to show that you're a team player. But if you're burned out, how good of a team player are you going to be then? How good of a team player are you going to be if you have to be signed off for fatigue, for example? So you owe it to yourself and your team, actually, to manage expectations. And if you really cannot do something, to say so. Because they're not going to fire you if you simply say, I'm really sorry, I'm doing this, this, and this. I would love to help out, but I won't be able to start this until Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. And then you have a conversation. And then you'll be able to sort something out then. I think the second thing that you should be prepared for, or to certainly think about, are relationships. So networking. And I didn't appreciate the importance of networking and the people around me at the time, but they are key. And finding out who can help you and how you can help them is also really, really important. So they're my two main areas. Does anyone have any questions. I can see, I'm just opening the chat here. Oh, yeah, so how can you manage stress when having very tight deadlines to meet and a lot of pressures on output? So I think we've touched on this a little bit through the you could employ the 4-question technique there. And the reality is you are going to have tight deadlines. That is just the reality of the job. Also what I mentioned around scheduling too, and having conversations, talking to people around you is really important. Don't just say yes to everything and then struggle to complete it, because it's much better to be honest, and if you are really struggling, to say, like, I can't do this, instead of just simply not saying anything, producing something which is not very good, and then taking a lot longer to sort it out in the long run. So being open and honest, I would say, is really, really important. Next question. Do you utilize any productivity and time efficiency app that you'd recommend to manage work plus life commitments? I personally don't, because I don't tend to use that many apps. That's personal choice for me. But I'm sure there are many out there, but I try and minimize use of that. But that's personal preference. It's personal preference. But I'm afraid I can't think of any off the top of my head. I don't know if anyone here has any ideas. Feel free to put them into the chat. Might be able to help come up with some suggestions there. Then feel free to do that. Sometimes the stress anxiety comes from others, e.g. your work progress depends on a response from your colleague, your client, and they're just not providing it in time. The anxiety in waiting around is also very unhealthy. How do you deal with this type of stress? Yeah, you're absolutely right. We can't always control what's going on around us, and if we're waiting on stuff to come in from other people and it doesn't come in, but then someone else is waiting on our response, but we can't respond until that person's responded, then yeah, absolutely, that can cause a lot of stress in that situation. Because I've come across this, it's quite common when you're in a transactional role, particularly as a lawyer, when you're dealing with lots of different counterparties. You're always waiting for stuff to come in before you can then pass it on. Don't beat yourself up about it, in the sense that if there's something that you need and you haven't got it, that's not directly your fault. There's we each have responsibility to do what we are expected to do when it comes to a project or a piece of work. So if you're waiting on something, follow up with that person that you're waiting on from. Maybe there's a reason as to why there's a delay. We don't want to assume that they're just trying to be awkward, but perhaps there is a valid reason. See if there's anything you can do to help them expedite that response. And then at the same time, get in touch with the person that's waiting on your response and keep them up to date with the picture. Keep them fully informed. I think it comes down to managing that communication piece, and don't keep secrets, I guess, is the best way, the best kind of advice there. Be open, have a conversation. You're all adults, and find a way forward. I think I found that by simply by trying to be proactive and show that I was trying to get the information actually helped me deal with the stress, and also helped all the other parties involved know what was going on, and then we could move forward, essentially. I hope that helps. Has anybody got any other questions? Okay, well, I just want to mention very briefly an event which is coming up next week. This is a Cheeky Little Careers event. It's around the qualifying work experience, which is a big part of your route qualification. And this is especially relevant if you're considering self-funding the vocational stage of the route qualification. So Hasnara, through Cheeky Little Careers, has teamed up with Abcde Trainee, and there's a live Q&A, which is next Wednesday, 21st of April, from 1 until 2, which is a free event to sign up to, where lots of questions will be asked and answered about the qualifying work experience. So if you want more information on that, please go onto the Cheeky Little Careers website, and under the events tab, you'll find lots there. But otherwise, unless anyone has anything else, it's been a real pleasure being with you today. Thank you for your time and thank you for your attention, and I hope you found it useful. Have a good afternoon.